Okay, when I ended yesterday, we met Mrs. Witch. And Mrs. Witch said that she didn't think she's going to be able to materialize completely. She finds it tiring, but they have a lot to do. Very interesting. I'm going to read the first part of The Black Thing, chapter 4. I'll read the second part tomorrow. And I hope I don't have problems with my... Let's see. Oh, that's going to work well. I can almost do both pages on one. All right. The Black Thing, Chapter 4. The trees were lashed into a violent frenzy. Meg screamed and clutched at Calvin, and Mrs. Witch's authoritative voice called out, "Quiet, child!" Did a shadow fall across the moon, or did the moon simply go out, extinguished as abruptly and completely as a candle? There was still the sound of leaves, a terrifying rushing. All light was gone. Darkness was complete. Suddenly the wind was gone, and all sound. Meg felt that Calvin was being torn from her. When she reached for him, her finger touched nothing. She screamed out, "Charles!" And whether it was to help him or for him to help her, she did not know. The word was flung back down her throat, and she choked on it. She was completely alone. She had lost the protection of Calvin's hand. Charles was nowhere, either to save or to turn to. She was alone in a fragment of nothingness. No light, no sound, no feeling. Where was her body? She tried to move in her panic, but there was nothing to move. Just as light and sound had vanished, she was gone too. The corporeal Meg seemed simply was not. Then she felt her limbs again. Her legs and arms were tingling faintly, as though they had been asleep. She blinked her eyes rapidly, but though she herself was somehow back, nothing else was. It was not as simple as darkness or absence of light. Darkness has a tangible quality, or it can be moved through and felt. In darkness, you can bark your shins. The world of things still exists around you. She was lost in a horrifying void. So what they're saying is, you can be in a dark basement like me down here and not see anything, but you can feel things. You know that you are somewhere. This isn't like that with her. It was the same way with the silence. This was more than silence. A deaf person can feel vibrations. Here there was nothing to feel. Suddenly, she was aware of her heart beating rapidly within the cage of her ribs. Had it stopped before? What had made it start again? The tingling in her arms and legs grew stronger, and suddenly she felt movement. This movement, she felt, must be the turning of the earth, rotating on its axis, traveling its elliptic course about the sun. And this feeling of moving with the earth was somehow like the feeling of being in the ocean. Out in the ocean, beyond this rising and falling of the breakers, lying on the moving water, pulsing gently with the swells and feeling the gentle, inexorable tug of the moon. I am asleep. I am dreaming, she thought. I'm having a nightmare. I want to wake up. Let me wake up. "Well," Charles Wallace's voice said, "that was quite a trip. I do think you might have warned us." Light began to pulse and quiver. Meg blinked and shoved shakily at her glasses. And there was Charles Wallace standing indignantly in front of her, his hands on his hips. "Meg," he shouted. "Calvin, where are you?" She saw Charles, she heard him, but she could not go to him. She could not shove through the strange, trembling light to see him. Calvin's voice came as though it were pushing through a cloud. "Well, just give me time, will you? I am older than you are," Meg gasped. It wasn't that Calvin wasn't there and then that he was. It wasn't that part of him came first and the rest of him followed, like a hand and then an arm, an eye, and then a nose. It was sort of a shimmering, a looking at Calvin through water, through smoke, through fire, and then there he was, solid and reassuring. "Meg!" Charles Wallace's voice came out. "Meg! Calvin! Where's Meg?" "I'm right here," she tried to say, but her voice seemed to be caught at its source. "Meg!" Calvin cried, and he turned around, looking about wildly. "Mrs. Witch, you haven't left Meg behind, have you?" Charles Wallace shouted. "If you've hurt Meg, any of you," Calvin started, but suddenly Meg felt a violent push and a shattering as though she had been thrust through a wall of glass. "Oh, there you are," Charles Wallace said, and rushed over to her and hugged her. "But where am I?" Meg asked breathlessly, relieved to hear that her voice was now coming out of her in more or less a normal way. She looked around rather wildly. They were standing in a sunlit field, and the air about them was moving with a delicious fragrance that comes only on the rarest of spring days when the sun's touch is gentle and apple blossoms are just beginning to unfold. She pushed her glasses up on her nose to reassure herself that what she was seeing was real. They had left the silver glint of a biting autumn evening, and now around them everything was golden with light. The grasses of the field were a tender new green, and scattered about were tiny multicolored flowers. Meg turned slowly to face a mountain reaching so high into the sky that its peak was lost in a crown of puffy white clouds. From the trees at the base of the mountain came a sudden singing of birds. There was an air of such ineffable peace and joy all around her that her heart's wild thumping slowed. "When shall we three meet again, in thunder, lightning, or in rain?" came Mrs. Who's voice. Suddenly, the three of them were there. Mrs. Whatsit, with her pink stole askew, Mrs. Who, with her spectacles gleaming, and Mrs. Witch, still little more than a shimmer. Delicate, multicolored butterflies were fluttering about them, as though in greeting. Mrs. Whatsit and Mrs. Who began to giggle, and they giggled until it seemed that, whatever their private joke was, they would fall down with the wild fun of it. The shimmer seemed to be laughing too. It became vaguely darker and more solid, and then there appeared a figure in a black robe and a black peaked hat, beady eyes, a beaked nose, and long gray hair. One bony claw clutched a broomstick. I'm trying to get this up. "Well, just to keep you girls happy," the strange voice said, and Mrs. Whatsit and Mrs. Who fell into each other's arms in gales of laughter. "If you ladies have had your fun, I think you should tell Calvin and Meg a little more about all this," Charles Wallace said coldly. "You scared Meg half out of her wits, whisking her off this way without any warning." "Finextrunt animi raro et per paucu loquentis," Mrs. Who intoned Horace. "To action little, less to words inclined." "Mrs. Who, I wish you'd stop quoting." Charles Wallace sounded very annoyed. Mrs. Whatsit adjusted her stole. "But she finds it so difficult to verbalize. Charles, dear, it helps her if she can quote instead of working out words of her own." "And we mustn't lose our senses of humor," Mrs. Witch said. "The only way to cope with something deadly serious is to try to treat it a little lightly." Those are good words of advice, folks. In times like these, it is important to have a sense of humor. "But that's going to be hard for Meg," Mrs. Whatsit said. "It's going to be hard for her to realize that we are serious." "What about me?" Calvin asked. "The life of your father isn't at stake," Mrs. Whatsit told him. "What about Charles Wallace, then?" Mrs. Whatsit's unoiled door-hinge voice was warm with affection and pride. "Charles Wallace knows. Charles Wallace knows that it's far more than just the life of his father. Charles Wallace knows what's at stake. But remember," Mrs. Who said, and now I believe this is, I don't know what language this is, but it's Euphrates. "Nothing is hopeless. We must hope for everything." Sorry, I'm not doing good with my camera work here. "Where are we now, and how do we get here?" Calvin asked. "Uriel, the third planet of the star Malik, in the spiral nebula Messier 101. "This I'm supposed to believe?" Calvin asked indignantly. "As you like," Mrs. Witch said coldly. For some reason, Meg felt that Mrs. Witch, despite her looks and ephemeral broomstick, was someone in whom one could put complete trust. It doesn't seem any more peculiar than anything else that's happened. Well, then, someone just tell me how we got here. Calvin's voice was still angry, and his freckles seemed to stand out on his face. Even traveling at the speed of light, it would take us years and years to get here. Oh, well, we don't travel at the speed of anything, Mrs. Whatsit explained earnestly. We tesser. Or you might say we wrinkle. Clear as mud, Calvin said. Tesser, Meg thought. Could that have anything to do with Mother's Tesseract? She was about to ask when Mrs. Witch started to speak, and one did not interrupt when Mrs. Witch was speaking. Mrs. Whatsit is young and naive. She keeps thinking she can explain things in words, Mrs. Who said. Que plus sait, plus c'était. I can't speak French. Sorry, kids. French, you know. The more a man knows, the less he talks. Oh, those are very wise words. But she has to use words for Meg and Calvin, Charles reminded Mrs. Who. If you brought them along, they have the right to know what's going on. Meg went up to Mrs. Witch. In the intensity of her question, she had forgotten all about the Tesseract. Is my father here? Mrs. Witch shook her head. Not here, Meg. Let Mrs. Whatsit explain. She is young, and the language of words is easier for her than it is for Mrs. Who and me. We stopped here, Mrs. Whatsit explained, more or less to catch our breaths, and to give you a chance to know what you're up against. But what about Father? Meg asked. Is he all right? For a moment, love, yes. He's one of the reasons we're here, but you see, he's only one. Well, where is he? Please take me to him. We can't, not yet, Charles said. You have to be patient, Meg. But I'm not patient, Meg cried passionately. I've never been patient. Mrs. Who's glasses shone at her gently. If you want to help your father, then you must learn patience. Vitam impender viro, to stake one's life for the truth. That is what we must do. That is what your father is doing. Mrs. Whatsit nodded, her voice like Mrs. Who was very serious, very solemn. Then she smiled her radiant smile. Now, why don't you three children wander around and Charles can explain things a little? You're perfectly safe on Uriel. That's why we stopped here to rest. But aren't you coming with us? Meg asked fearfully. There was silence for a moment. Then Mrs. Witch raised her authoritative hand. Show them, she said to Mrs. Whatsit, and at something in her voice, Meg felt prickles of apprehension. Now? Mrs. Whatsit asked, her creaky voice rising to a squeak. Whatever it was Mrs. Witch wanted them to see, it was something that made Mrs. Whatsit uncomfortable too. Now, Mrs. Witch said, they may as well know. Should I change? Mrs. Whatsit asked. Better. I hope it won't upset the children too much, Mrs. Whatsit murmured, as though to herself. Should I change too? Mrs. Who asked. Oh, but I've had fun in these clothes. But I'll have to admit, Mrs. Whatsit is the best at it. Das Werk lobt dein Meister, German. The work proves the craftsman. Shall I transform now too? Mrs. Witch shook her head. Not yet. Not here. You may wait. Now don't be frightened, loves, Mrs. Whatsit said. Her plump little body began to shimmer, to quiver, to shift. The wild colors of her clothes became muted, whitened. The pudding bag shape stretched, lengthened, merged, and suddenly before the children was a creature more beautiful than any Meg had ever imagined. And the beauty lay in far more than the outward description. Outwardly, Mrs. Whatsit was surely no longer a Mrs. Whatsit. She was a marble white body with powerful flanks, something like a horse, but at the same time completely unlike a horse. For from the magnificently modeled back sprang a nobly formed torso, arms, and a head resembling a man's, but a man with a perfection of dignity and virtue, an exultation of joy, such as Meg had never before seen. No, she thought, it's not like a Greek centaur, not in the least. From the shoulders, slowly, a pair of wings unfolded, wings made of rainbows, of light upon water, of poetry. Calvin fell to his knees. No, Mrs. Whatsit said, though her voice was not Mrs. Whatsit's voice. Not to me, Calvin. Never to me. Stand up. Carry them, Mrs. Witch commanded. With a gesture both delicate and strong, Mrs. Whatsit knelt in front of the children, stretching her wings wide, holding them steady, but quivering. Onto my back now, the new voice said. The children took hesitant steps toward the beautiful creature. But what do we call you now? Calvin asked. Oh, my dears, came the new voice, a rich voice with the warmth of a woodwind, the clarity of a trumpet, the mystery of an English horn. You can't go on changing my name each time I metamorphose. And I've had such pleasure being Mrs. Whatsit, I think you'd better keep it at that. She, he, it smiled at them, and the radiance of the smile was as tangible as a soft breeze, as directly warming as the rays of sun. So the author, when they're saying it's tangible, it's real. Come, Charles Wallace clambered up. Meg and Calvin followed him, Meg sitting between the two boys. A tremor went through the great wings, and when Mrs. Whatsit lifted, and they were moving through the air. And then Mrs. Whatsit lifted, and they were moving through the air. Soon Meg found that there was no need to cling to Charles Wallace or Calvin. The great creature's flight was serenely smooth. The boys were eagerly looking around the landscape. Look, Charles Wallace pointed. The mountains are so tall you can't see where they end. Meg looked upward, and indeed the mountains seemed to be reaching into infinity. They left the fertile fields and flew across a great plateau of granite-like rock shaped into enormous monoliths. These had definite rhythmic form, but they were not statues. They were like nothing Meg had ever seen before, and she wondered if they had been made by wind and weather, by the formation of the earth, or if they were a creation of beings like the ones on which she rode. They left the great granite plain and flew over a garden even more beautiful than anything in a dream. In it were gathered many of the creatures like the one Mrs. Whatsit had become, some lying among the flowers, some swimming in a broad crystal river that flowed through the garden, some flying in what Meg was sure must be a kind of dance, moving in and out above the trees. They were making music that came not only from their throats, but from the movements of their great wings as well. What are they singing? Meg asked excitedly. Mrs. Whatsit shook her beautiful head. It won't go into your words. I can't possibly transfer it to your words. Are you getting any of it, Charles? Charles Wallace sat very still on the broad back, on his face an intently listening look, the look he had when he delved into Meg or his mother. A little, just a very little, but I think I could get more in time. Yes, you could learn it, Charles, but there isn't time. We can only stay here as long enough to rest up and make a few preparations. Meg hardly listened to her. I want to know what they're saying. I want to know what it means. Try, Charles, Mrs. Whatsit urged. Try to translate. You can let yourself go now. You don't have to hold back. But I can't, Charles Wallace cried in an anguished voice. I don't know enough, not yet. Then try to work with me, and I'll see if I can't verbalize it a little for them. Charles Wallace got his look of probing and listening. I know that look, Meg thought suddenly. Now I think I know what it means, because I've had it myself. Sometimes doing math with Father, when a problem is just about to come clear. Mrs. Whatsit seemed to be listening to Charles's thoughts. Well, yes, that's an idea. Well, I can try. Too bad you don't really know it, so you can give it to me direct, Charles. It's so much more work this way. Don't be lazy, Charles said. Mrs. Whatsit did not take offense. She explained. Oh, it's my favorite kind of work, Charles. That's why they chose me to go along, even though I'm so much younger. It's my one real talent. It takes a tremendous amount of energy, and we're going to need every ounce of energy for what's ahead of us. But I'll try. For Calvin and Meg, I'll try. She was silent. The great wings almost stopped moving. Only a delicate stirring seemed to keep them aloft. Listen then, Mrs. Whatsit said. The resonant voice rose, and the words seemed to be all around them, so that Meg felt that she could almost reach out and touch them. Sing unto the Lord a new song, and his praise from the end of the earth, ye that go down to the sea, and all that is therein, the isles and the inhabitants thereof. Let the wilderness and the cities thereof lift their voice. Let the inhabitants of the rock sing. Let them shout from the top of the mountains. Let them give glory unto the Lord. Throughout her entire body, Meg felt a pulse of joy such as she had never known before. Calvin's hand reached out. He did not clasp her hand in his. He moved his fingers so that they were barely touching hers. But joy flowed through them, back and forth between them, around them, and about them, and inside them. When Mrs. Whatsit sighed, it seemed completely incomprehensible that through this bliss could come the faintest whisper of a doubt. We must go now, children. Mrs. Whatsit's voice was deep with sadness, and Meg could not understand. Raising her head, Mrs. Whatsit gave a call that seemed to be a command, and one of the creatures flying above the trees nearest them raised its head to listen, and then flew off and picked 3 flowers from a tree growing near the river and brought them over. Each of you take one, Mrs. Whatsit said. I'll tell you how to use them later. I think I'm going to stop there. Oh my gosh. Yes. Good job.